flight gave birds mobility, right? All birds can fly. Well, most birds can fly, right? Some mammals can fly, so they have that same dispersal mobility, and right. And then we said because both birds and mammals are endothermic, the ability to create their own body heat, that was also why they were successful on many more continents. Reptiles and amphibians, of course, are significantly less successful because not only do they not contain the power of flight, but they're ectothermic, right? So they use the environment around them to create body heat. Very nervous now. So we finished up talking about some other features that affect dispersal, and here we specifically looked at density as another way to look at dispersal, okay, or abundance per area, right? So here we were looking at per hectare. So in this case, as we're looking at diversity or density, okay, we were basically saying that we have less organisms in a given area, okay, which is sort of the inverse. Okay, so these would be more organisms in a given area, so organisms that are less successful at dispersing. Okay, they're all kind of stuck in one specific area. So our top box, okay, we said if, right, we have more organisms in a given area that cannot fly, okay, that supported our original argument that flight was key to being able to move around. Okay, our bottom box, okay, our B graphic, was a new concept. Okay, so this rated our organisms, I'll set off to the side here, based on weight. Okay, so remember we had to note that we had greater than a kilogram. So these are very heavy organisms. Okay, and less than a gram, these are very light organisms. Okay, so, right, increasing weight, greater dispersal distance. And we kind of had to think about this a second, because it almost feels counterintuitive, but we talked about the bigger you are, the slower metabolism you are, but also the larger resource pool that you have, right? Because you're going to eat more at a given time. So you're going to have a larger territory or a larger range of food. Right? So you have a long dispersal distance, but for little guys, okay, first off, it's harder to disperse. We want to think about like being an ant. Okay, what does a long distance mean to an ant? That probably means the size of your kitchen. Okay, and they can't go a very long time without eating, and so a couple of steps, right, or a short distance for them is probably it. Okay, that's where we left off on class. We had just finished up this graphic. Were there any questions on this before we finished up? Because I was a little worried we kind of like finished up super quick, and I wanted to make sure we checked back in before moving on. Shiny. Okay, so the last thing I wanted to talk about, and we just started talking about this in Lab on Monday, so we just barely missed talking about this in time, but now you've had some experience with this, is other things that affect dispersal and range limitation. So another term to learn is this idea of dispersion. Okay, which is slightly different than dispersal. So remember, dispersal is talking about range, right? So how I'm actually going to move and how far I'm going to move as an individual or a population. Okay, dispersion is the actual arrangement of individuals within that space. Okay. So we saw all three of these, and hopefully you played with them a little bit in lab when we were doing our mark recapture activity. Okay. So the way organisms separate themselves out depends on a lot of things. Largely, okay, a mixture of biotic, okay, so things like competition, right, and territory lines, okay, as well as abiotic, okay, the location of specific essential resources that they need to acquire. Okay, so we can group these spatial arrangements into three major types of spatial arrangements. Okay, regular, and to be clear, okay, it's not mathematically regular. I very rarely do you see things like perfectly evenly spaced. But more or less, okay, individuals evenly spacing themselves apart from one another. Okay, random, okay, where there seems to be no pattern whatsoever. Okay, and clumped. Okay, so regular and random you'll find in organisms, okay, that are individuals or in plants. Okay, and clumped you'll find in some plants, and then in organisms that move in herds or in some kind of packs, right, in groups. Okay, so clumped is going to be common for groups, okay, or in areas that have more abundant resources. Okay, random and regular will be more common for less resource-heavy areas, okay, or more territorial organisms. Okay, so I have a couple of plant examples up for both regular and clumped. All right, let's look at a couple examples of these. And let's not leave that pink up because it'll be a nightmare. All right, let's look at clumped versus regular. Put pictures up. So, I'm going to actually go back so we can look at them. If I have this instance versus this instance, okay, why might I have these little bushes sitting at those very specific looking regular instances? Okay. Or, for example, I don't know if you guys have seen fairy circles, okay, where you get like the mushrooms that all span out sort of almost exactly from a center. That's a version of regular. Okay, so why might we end up with something like that versus this sort of business where you have very almost oddly shaped clumped patterns? Okay, so take a hot second, think of a couple reasons why you might see one or the other, and we'll come back together and talk about some drivers, excuse me, of one or the other. And this should finish us up. Okay, let's take a look, excuse me, at our regular patterns first. So why might we see this almost counterintuitive situation where organisms are evenly spaced, right? That's sort of weird. Humans do this sort of business, but it's kind of weird to see other organisms elbow out in evenly spaced environments. And why might we see that? Okay, so for our plants here, we might imagine that we have roots reaching out. Okay, these guys have roots too, so why are these guys all spaced out nicely though? So you're on it, girl. What's the difference though here? What's probably going on? What kind of environment are these guys in? It's dry, right? So one of the big drivers of these sorts of things are competition for nutrients. Okay, so in this particular one, E is right on. Okay, so they're spreading their roots out, and they've separated themselves in such a way that they're not competing for the same water table. Okay, we see this a lot in forests, right, where the trees are all relatively spread out the same distance. Okay, whether they're dense or spread out depends on the forest, but so that they're largely not pulling from the same nutrient pool, okay, or the same light pool, right? So there's not a lot of overlap for whatever it is that they're competing for. Okay, because anyone in the middle, okay, it's probably going to die. Blech. Right, because there's not going to be enough water or enough light or enough whatever. Okay. This is the same thing for animals when they've spread themselves up that way. Okay, they set themselves up into territories. Okay, but the same sort of concept, right? There's some sort of food or water system, okay, that is scarce enough, okay, that this is my territory. Okay, I'm a leopard. Okay, back up off this. I hunt in this space. Okay, I've marked this territory. And if you get up in this territory, it's going to be a problem. Okay, even if you consider a single dot a meerkat family, okay, that whole family is going to stay in that space, regularly spaced apart from another meerkat family. Okay, and they need to hunt in that territory, separated out from a separate family, right? Okay, let's look at clumped. Okay, there's certainly not a lot of pattern here, except for the fact, let's switch colors, that they're all together. So why would, we just said, right, that these guys kept their distance, so their roots didn't overlap, so everybody had enough. Okay, and these guys seem to be breaking all the rules for that. So why would that happen, perhaps? Okay, so one thing we might see is that there's pockets of nutrients. And maybe there's enough. Okay, so dispersal for things like seeds might help. Right? Or rather, in this case, I suppose, lack thereof. Right? So I'm just kind of dropping them rather than blowing them. Okay. Now, in this particular case, this looks pretty green around here. So what else might be going on? Why might I choose to hang out here rather than venture out? That blue kind of stinks, huh? Yeah, that's better. Let's think of this from an animal perspective. Sometimes it's a little easier. Our mammal bias gets in the way. If this is a pack of wolves, why might I choose to stay here rather than quite literally lone wolf it out? Why stay clumped together? Right, so you get benefits from staying in the group, right? So with wolves, you get protection, there's help in hunting, so there are group mutualisms going on. Okay, plants get that stuff too. Okay, it's harder for us to see, okay, but it's the same sort of situation. Okay, they do share nutrients, they do share alarm calls, okay, and all sorts of stuff like that. So for these guys, okay, it may be something like a mutualism breaking down. Nutrients, sharing that kind of stuff for each other, okay. Being more dense protects them from predators, sharing those alarms. All of those things may be better beneficial than being one of these rogue organisms. Okay, so both of those were good answers.
So what did you say the reason for random?
We didn't go over that one.
Oh.
So what might be a reason for random?
There's no real competition with like maybe the root system and like any kind of resources that are
Right, so if we're saying random, I remember that's this one. No, that's rude. I'm drawing. Okay. There probably isn't as strong a structure driving this, right? Now, there's probably some competition, and there might be some areas that have better resources than others. Okay. But in this case, it's probably random dispersal, random movement, random immigration. Okay. So the patterns that you see here, you're not seeing as strong structured drivers, okay, of abiotic or biotic features. Okay, now there's probably all of those things in there. There's mutualisms, there's competitions, there's always fitness at play, so there's limitation of resources, but it's not happening in a way where there's obviously benefit, disadvantage, right? It's just generically patchy.